Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, we've got hazardous weather graphic, and there's a flood advisory, continues until 10 p.m. this evening for the eastern North Gulf Coast there. For minor flooding from the recent rain, some of the rivers a shade over flood stage and actually been receding throughout the day today, but the flood advisory ends at 10 p.m. this evening. And then back to the west and northwest there's a high wind watch out for the St. Lawrence Island area and the Bering Strait coast. That kicks into effect Wednesday afternoon into the evening, and that's for possible damaging winds. South to southeast winds increasing during Wednesday afternoon, increasing 30 to 40 miles per hour sustained, with gusts above 60 miles an hour possible for that area. Moving on to satellite imagery, you can see a pretty well-defined low-pressure area, spiral shape to the clouds there, southeast of St. Paul, kind of north of the eastern Aleutians there at the front, extending from the Pribilof Islands in across western Bristol Bay, down across the Alaska Peninsula. And that kicking the winds up out in the northwest for the central Aleutians, gusts 50 to 55 miles an hour out there, and southeast winds 30 to 40 miles an hour, up to 45 miles an hour from the southeast across the Alaska Peninsula. And some rain, not particularly heavy rainfall amounts there. Falls Pass and the eastern Aleutians in the last 12 hours picked about 0.2 of an inch, as did the Pribilofs. Lighter amounts out in the scattered showers to the west over the central Aleutians. Adak had about 1/10 of an inch of rain. Otherwise, variably cloudy over the Panhandle, but basically a dry day today there. Earlier rain ended at Cordova. They had about 1/3 of an inch, and the rain finally ended there at about noontime today, with some fair amount of sun breaks over Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, allowing temperatures to rise in the mid to upper 50s this afternoon into the southern Susitna Valley. And about the same over the Panhandle, temperatures in the mid to upper 50s, some cases near 60 in some locations, like Klawock was close to 60 degrees at mid-afternoon. Also, a lot of clouds over the interior with a few breaks in the overcast there, Copper River Basin and north of the Alaska Range. Rainfall amounts pretty light, just a few hundredths of an inch over the southwest interior northward across the Yukon River there. And up on the Arctic coast, winds out of the east-northeast, 15 to 25 miles an hour, a few higher gusts there, and temperatures in the 20s throughout the day today. In some cases lower 20s, like at Umiat Airfield. And rolling this one more time, not much out to the west there. You can see the increase in the clouds over Kamchatka Peninsula, but the next storm's a couple of days away yet. And on the chart today, you can just see a warm front making the far left-hand picture there, pushing in across the Komodorskis this afternoon. The main low center north of the eastern Aleutians, about 986 millibars, with a tight gradient supporting those 50 to 55 mile an hour wind gusts from Atka eastward to Nikolsky. And then southeast winds in advance of the front, gusting 40 to 45 miles an hour and up to 35 miles an hour across Bristol Bay, mainly along the coast, with some areas of light rain, fog, cloudy skies, right up across Norton Sound to the southern Seward Peninsula. But breaking out, a few scattered rain and snow showers over the mountainous terrain, Alaska Range into the Copper River Basin, Talkeetnas, but basically dry, temperatures in the upper 50s around Butte and in toward Palmer today, as well as the Kenai Peninsula with some sunshine. And again, the showers tapering off in the North Gulf Coast, eastern North Gulf Coast as well. High pressure made for a partly sunny day over the Panhandle. For tonight, that front elongates eastward, pushes up across Kodiak for rain there, periods of up to the southern Kenai Peninsula, southern Cook Inlet. Rain chances start to increase over Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound late tonight. Periods of rain, fog or drizzle over the western interior, becomes more of a rain or snow shower situation from the Seward Peninsula up to mostly snow showers to the western Brooks Range, western Arctic coast. Dry for the Panhandle with a few, with areas of low clouds and fog developing later. Then tomorrow, increasing rain along the coast of the Panhandle. Rain and wind, Kodiak Island, basically dry over the interior, except for that trough up over the west and northwest part of the state. And then out to the west there, next big storm pushes that active front and a tightening of the gradient there with those possible gusts of 60 miles an hour, high wind watch again, St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Strait coast. Otherwise, a very weak front keeps a chance of rain along the North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. Basically dry except for some rain or snow showers over the Copper River Basin, but interior Alaska under high pressure looking pretty good. Lows for tonight in the 40s over the Panhandle, 30s to mid-40s over the remainder of interior Alaska, except upper 40s for Kodiak Island. Highs tomorrow in the 50s for the most part, except mid-60s down toward Klawock, Heidelberg, and Craig area. And then the low temperatures Wednesday morning, upper 40s northern Panhandle, mid-50s to the south, and in the 30s over much of interior Alaska, south central, mostly in the 40s, near 50 Kodiak Island, followed by highs in the mid-50s, lower 50s Kuskokwim Valley, mid-60s again, the southern Panhandle. Lows tonight, upper teens and lower 20s for the Brooks Range on out to the North Slope and Arctic coast. 20s to mid-30s for the central and eastern interior, near 40 out to the west. And then highs tomorrow, lower to mid-30s Arctic coast, North Slope, Brooks Range, 40s to lower 50s over the central interior, followed by lows mostly in the 30s south of the Brooks Range, mostly in the 20s north of the mountains. And then highs the next day, 40s to near 50 around Fairbanks and Northway. Otherwise, 30s again for the Arctic coast, North Slope, and Brooks Range. Out to the west, lows in the lower 40s tonight, upper 30s St. Lawrence Island. Highs in the lower 40s St. Lawrence Island, 45 to 50 along the southwest coast, lower 50s Alaska Peninsula. Lows back into the upper 30s to mid-40s, followed by highs in the 40s to mid-50s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather. VFR for the Arctic coast, North Slope. Some IFR and marginal VFR along and south of the Brooks Range into the northern Koyukuk valleys, and marginal VFR for the Noatak Valley, northwest coast. Otherwise, the interior not too bad. Central interior, Kuskokwim Valley, mostly VFR. Alaska Range, some marginal VFR along and south of the mountains there, along with some VFR, especially over the eastern Copper River Basin down into the Panhandle. And then some scattered IFR, south central Alaska, and scattered VFR as well, mostly IFR Kodiak Island. And narrow band of IFR from the Seward Peninsula right on down to just east of the Pribilofs. Central southern Bering Sea, Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, marginal VFR. And for the afternoon, about the same, couple of bands of IFR out over the southwest Bering Sea there, another batch moving into Shemya and Attu. Otherwise, mostly marginal there for the eastern Bering Sea and the Aleutians, a little bit of IFR on the north coast of the western Alaska Peninsula. And then some IFR starting to build on the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, as well as the eastern Kenai Peninsula up into western Prince William Sound, possibly maybe to Portage, maybe not. Otherwise, good VFR for the Prince William Sound area, Copper River Basin, Matanuska-Susitna Valley, northern Cook Inlet, western Kenai Peninsula, and the interior looking good. And improving there for the Brooks Range during the afternoon hours. And for Prince of Wales Island, marginal VFR, otherwise VFR for the southeast coast. IFR begins to increase along the southern coast of the Panhandle on Wednesday with marginal VFR all the way up to Skagway. Otherwise, the North Gulf Coast looking pretty good. A little bit of marginal VFR possible in the Resurrection Bay and Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay area, but not too bad. Good VFR, most of the interior, especially south of the Yukon River, well, even north of the Yukon River to the eastern Arctic coast, central and western Arctic coast, some IFR there, Seward Peninsula, some IFR, northern Bering Sea, big area of IFR out over the southwest Bering. And for the afternoon, band of IFR right up the east side of Kodiak Island to about Cape St. Elias there, marginal VFR Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, Panhandle. Pretty good in the interior, just some areas of marginal VFR, same thing for the Arctic coast. Big area of IFR out over the St. Matthew Island area to the west down to near Atka Island westward to Attu. And for passes, Anatuvik for the day Tuesday, starting out IFR, trending toward marginal VFR. Should be improvement for both passes throughout the day. I'll go VFR for Adigan for improvement from the IFR conditions early. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, lowest conditions eastern entrance. Rainy though, looks optimistically to be a VFR day. Windy VFR. Eastern Alaska Range also VFR, Isabel and Mentasta looking good. Tanita VFR. And Portage, possible IFR in the eastern entrance, otherwise marginal. And for Chilkoot and White, pretty good VFR. Freezing levels 2,000 to 4,000 feet over the central and southern part of the state. Mainland Alaska there at the surface, Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast. And then running about 6,000 to 10,000 feet over the Panhandle, and the southwest Bering Sea about the same, 6,000 to 10,000 feet. Icing, some considerable moderate rime icing up into Kodiak, Fognak Islands, maybe the Barren Islands, otherwise light to isolated moderate, into the southern Kenai Peninsula, maybe southern Cook Inlet, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, and then some elevated icing threats there from the Nulato Hills across eastern Seward Peninsula, Noatak Valley to the western Arctic coast. And for the jet stream, very sharp upper trough there from the Chukchi Sea right down along the Yukon Delta coast across the Alaska Peninsula. Northerlies up to 130 knots there, blowing right across the eastern Aleutians, and then south to basically southeast, becoming southwest, only at about 65 knots in the interior. High pressure there, making for light wind conditions over the Panhandle. And at 9,000 feet, 45 knot southeast winds there coming across the Gulf toward the Kenai Peninsula. Northerlies 40 to 60 knots over the Bering Sea. 3,000 feet, north winds 40 knots, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. East-southeast up to 60 knots there coming across the Barren Islands. 40 knots coming into the Panhandle. Then westerlies at 55 knots coming into the western Aleutians. And considerable moderate chop for the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, all the way down to the Fox Islands, western Aleutians as well. And then the Panhandle, southern areas, mostly over the western Prince of Wales Island up to about Sitka.
Here at the end of the Earth, it still feels like a place for raw exploration and adventure. It's vast in all directions, and ground zero for some of the biggest questions we have about the climate. But when we decided to make a series about the frozen places on Earth, we knew there would be one hurdle we would need to jump over first. What is the cryosphere?
The what?
Ooh.
I have no idea.
While I'm aware of the cryosphere, I don't actually know what it is.
It has something to do with ice. All right, that's all I got.
How do you get people acquainted with the cryosphere when most of us don't even know what it is?
Hey, so here we are in Washington, D.C., standing on the roof of NASA headquarters. That's the Capitol building right behind me. And what headquarters does is kind of serve as the focal point to connect the dots.
That's Dr. Tom Wagner, NASA's cryospheric program scientist at headquarters. In short, Tom is responsible for making sure NASA knows what the current status of the cryosphere is.
The cryosphere is everything from the snow that falls by your house to the icy reaches of the Himalayas, to the big ice sheets of Antarctica all the way at the South Pole, and also the frozen ground of the Arctic, and even some of that frozen ground that's currently under the ocean.
If you had to break it down, you'd have a mix of sea ice, snow cover, permafrost, ice sheets, and glaciers.
Right now, our best predictions are that sea levels will rise anywhere from 1 to 3 feet within the next 100 years. 3 feet of sea level rise has the potential to displace about 100 million people, which is a lot of people that need to find new homes.
Our current reality places us at a near tipping point, and the cryosphere is playing a huge part in that delicate balance.
So one of the things people don't know about NASA is that we study the Earth, and we've been doing that since NASA's inception back in the 1950s. And we study the frozen part of the Earth in a variety of ways.
Missions like SNOWX, Airborne Snow Observatory, Oceans Melting Greenland, Operation Icebridge, Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment, and countless other labs and individual researchers stand at the forefront of monitoring the cryosphere. But this year was a particularly big year.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Grace Follow-On, continuing the legacy of the Grace mission of tracking the movement of water across our planet.
2 state-of-the-art satellite missions are being launched in a single year as part of a major attempt to understand Earth's frozen places. Our scientists are answering hard questions, sharing stories from the field, and giving their best predictions for what we can expect of a warming world. We're taking you with us as we follow NASA explorers on their journey to the frozen ends of the Earth as they study our rapidly changing world from satellites, planes, and boots on the ground.
What we can do really well from orbit is we can tell when a surface of land is covered in snow. What's tricky is though, how thick is that snow? And it's even trickier how much water is in that snow.
What we think of snow depends a lot on where it falls. If you live in the eastern US, maybe it's fun. Or maybe it's just a pain.
But if you live in parts of the world where they depend on the water that's in the snow for a large fraction of their total water that they use for drinking, for agriculture, for industry, or for hydropower, the snow is a very important natural resource. For example, in the western part of the United States, 80 to 90% of their renewable water comes from snow.
Snow is one part of the cryosphere that many of us have actually encountered before, but it also plays a critical role in regulating the Earth's climate. Through decades of remote sensing, NASA has kept a close eye on the ebb and flow of snow cover.
We now have a 52-year record of snow cover in the Northern Hemisphere, and we can see changes in the extent of snow cover over the time period, particularly in the last few decades, where we can see that the snow cover has been retreating. It's been melting a lot earlier in the springtime.
The extent is relatively easy to do, and it has been done over the years. What's tricky is though, how thick is that snow? And it's even trickier how much water is in that snow.
That tricky part is known as the snow water equivalent, or how much water would actually be in a layer of snow if it melted. NASA and its partners have taken to the air to help solve this elusive mystery. First, there's the Airborne Snow Observatory, or ASO, a small plane outfitted with a couple of instruments, one of which measures snow depth using LiDAR. LiDAR measures distance using light from lasers. Since 2014, ASO has flown over basins in California and Colorado, taking before and after looks at snow depth. Scientists subtract the snow-free summer data from the snow-on winter data to get an idea of the snow depth. There's no single way to measure all types of snow across the globe, and so NASA's other airborne campaign, SNOWX, is testing different combinations of sensors. This winter, SNOWX will test a new instrument, the Snow Water Equivalent Synthetic Aperture Radar and Radiometer, or SWISAR.
SWISAR consists of 2 main components, one of them being the radar and the second one being the radiometer.
So with the radar providing the depth of the snow and the radiometer providing the density of the snow, we could put those 2 things together and get the snow water equivalent Here in the chamber, we're going to measure different radiation patterns at our different frequencies and do some full system testing in this chamber. This chamber kind of enables us to isolate various types of radiation and interference. And in about a month, we're going to take the instrument, mount it on a Twin Otter in the Grand Mesa in Colorado, and we're going to fly it over the Grand Mesa and take various different measurements. This is what we call our engineering flight.
Making sure the sensors are calibrated is key in order to face the challenges nature will throw at them.
Half of the area that gets covered by snow every winter contains trees and forest. And the trees make it difficult for the sensors to see the snow that's underneath the trees, so it makes it difficult for us to measure how much snow there is. After the snow's had a chance to sit on the ground for a while, it gets denser and denser and denser over time, and it changes. Which is another reason why snow is very challenging to remotely sense. It doesn't stay the same, it's constantly changing. One of the things that we often do in the field is go dig what we call a snow pit. We literally dig a pit in the snow so we can see all the different layers. The layering is very important.
All this digging is part of ground truthing SNOWX, a way of matching up what the airborne instruments see and what is actually sitting on the surface. The ultimate goal of SNOWX is to figure out what the best combination of instruments would be for a future satellite mission in order to get a global picture of snow.
We need to know how much snow is in a snowpack, because if we have too much snow and the snow melts too fast, then you can get flooding. And if you don't have enough snow, or if the snow melts too early, that can lead to a longer wildfire season, a more intense drought, and we need to know these things for water resource planning.
After we had a record that was about 15, 20 years long, we started noticing that the extent of the ice in the Arctic was getting smaller over time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Water forecast down along the Panhandle. On the south coast, east winds 20 to 25 knots. North coast, about the same, except east-northeast winds 20 to 25 knots. Central and northern inner channels and waters, north winds 15 knots, seas about 3 feet. And for Clarence Strait, northwest winds at 10 knots with 3-foot seas. And for the day on Wednesday, on the south coast, small craft advisory, southeast winds 25 knots, and a little stronger on the north coast, east-southeast winds at 30 knots, seas just under 10 feet. South winds 15 knots for Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, north winds at 15 knots, and then back to the southeast at 15 knots for Clarence Strait. And for the North Gulf Coast, gale warnings tomorrow, east winds 35 to 40 knots, seas 8 to 10 feet. The Prince William Sound, much lighter, northeast at 15. And for Cook Inlet, gale warnings, northeast winds 30 to 40 knots with 8 to 15-foot seas. And for Kamishak Bay, northeast winds 45 knots, and the Barren Islands, east winds at 40 knots. Moving on to Wednesday, North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands, east winds 30 knots with 12 to 13-foot seas. Kamishak Bay, small craft advisories, as well as southern Cook Inlet for northeast winds at 25 knots. Northern Cook Inlet, northeast winds at 15, and Prince William Sound, northeast winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. Kodiak Island, gale warnings, east-northeast winds 25 to 30 knots for Tuesday. Small craft advisories for the Alaska Peninsula, north to northwest winds 25 to 30 knots, and Bristol Bay, small craft advisories, northeast winds 30 knots, seas just under 10 feet. And for Wednesday, for the Alaska Peninsula, north winds 25 to 30 knots. Bristol Bay, north winds 25 knots. Kodiak Island, northeast winds 30 knots, seas 9 to 12 feet. And for the Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, gale warnings, northwest winds 35 to 40 knots, seas 15 to 17 feet. And small craft advisories for Adak and Atka, northwest 25 to 30 knot winds there. And then from Kiska to Shemya, winds turning south and increasing to 30 knots. And for the day Wednesday, small craft advisories from Shemya to Kiska for west-southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. And for the central Aleutians, southwest winds 25 knots. Mac Island, southwest at 20. Unalaska Island, northwest winds 25 to 35 knots with seas around 10 feet. For the southwest coast on Tuesday, north winds 25 knots. Pribilofs, northwest winds at 30 knots. St. Matthew Island, northwest at 25. And then southeast or northeast winds at 15 knots for St. Lawrence Island. Southeast at 15 for Norton Sound. And for Wednesday, gale warnings, south winds coming up to 40 knots in the afternoon for St. Lawrence Island as well as St. Matthew Island. Otherwise, the Yukon Delta coast, south winds increasing to 30 knots. Northwest 25 for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline. Pribilofs, south winds 25 knots. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, pretty light winds for the central and east side, south to southwest at 10 knots, seas around 3 feet. And for the western Arctic coast to Cape Thompson, southeast winds 15 knots. Cape Thompson to Wales, south or west winds at 20 knots. And then for the day on Wednesday, small craft advisories from Wales to Cape Beaufort, south winds 25 to 30 knots. And southwest winds 20 knots on the western Arctic coast. Central coast, west winds at 20 knots. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, west winds 15 knots with seas running 3 to 4 feet. And for tonight, pretty dry with some fair amount of clearing in areas from the North Gulf Coast, Northern Panhandle, all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast, North Slope. Mostly cloudy in the central interior. Chance of showers along the Alaska Range mostly, and then increasing chances of rain into Prince William Sound and at least the southern and eastern Kenai Peninsula, southern Cook Inlet. Rain likely Kodiak Island. Gusty winds and rain for the eastern Aleutians. And for the day on Tuesday, weak trough brings some shower chances from the Yukon Delta, a little more extensive up over the western Brooks Range in the form of rain and snow. Wind and rain, moderate to heavy at times, gale force winds for the North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, and increasing chances of rain along the coast of the Panhandle in the afternoon. Not too bad in the interior from northern Cook Inlet northward. And out to the west on Wednesday, the next big storm coming out of the Russian Far East pushes a front. High wind watch, St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait coast. Thank you for joining us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.